Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our BDC Retail Property webinar. I'm Bruce McFarlane. I'm the CEO of BDC Partners. I'm also on the Victorian State Chapter Committee for the FCA. So it's been, as you all know, a crazy few years in franchising, in particular for bricks and mortar retailers, from lockdowns through to mini booms and now pretty flat conditions over the last sort of 12 months or so with interest rate rises, high inflation. So today we've got a panel of experts that are going to share their insights in what's coming from different angles and have a look. But we really do want everyone to participate. I know there's a lot of people on the call today that have got a lot of experience. So happy for you to share your insights and ask us questions on the way through as well. So thanks for joining. Yeah, keen if people are happy to keep their cameras on and we can have a discussion on the way through. So I'm going to change slides. Yep, that's worked out for everyone. As I said, I'm Bruce McFarlane. Our presenters today, we've got Keith Doyle, who's the CEO of BDC Property. We've got Lloyd Burke, who's the Regional Director at Developments for GapMaps, and Mark Gale, who is the CEO of Associated Projects. We're very thankful that Mark has actually arrived on his flight from Vietnam this morning. So thanks for joining us, guys.
That's mate.
So just before we get started on the content, just a little bit of background on us. So BDC Collective, as we like to call it, is a combination of some BDC entities. So BDC, we have 5 different operating entities. We've got a property business, which Keith runs. We've got a recruitment business, which Lisa, who's on there, and Dave, who's joining, run the business where we find franchisees. We've got a law firm where we act for franchisors and retailers. We've got a performance business, and we also have BDC Investments where we invest in emerging franchisors. And as part of the BDC Collective, we've got Associated Projects with Mark, we've got Hatch with Dave Lindsay, we've got GapMaps, Lloyd's part of that. And then accounting, insurance, we've got Richard from Benjamin, and we've got a finance business that we partner with very closely with as part of our community in franchising and retail. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to, in a perfect world, people leave their cameras on and it's an open discussion. If you do want to ask questions, there's a raise your hand function, and hopefully I will see that and answer the question, or you can also put questions in the chat there, which is just showing you how to do that now. I'm going to just stop sharing. There we go. So just to kick off, what we thought we'd do is, before we look at the trends going forward, we thought we'd look back first and get the panelists to all talk a little bit about what their reflections are on the retail property sector over the last sort of 12 months or even a little bit further back, and see where we are today. Keith, I might start with you. Kick off. What's your sort of take on where we've come from?
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. I think it's probably fair to say, Bruce, it's been somewhat of a mixed bag over probably the last 12 to 18 months. We came out of a post-COVID era where we thought bricks and mortar, for example, was probably going to die or was dying. We saw a re-emergence of what, the high street and the strip offered people that weren't traveling to the city, and people were working from home. And that landscape kind of settled down for a while, and it was great to see, particularly for those smaller mum and dad type operators that were working locally and operating businesses locally on street and strips. But I think as things kind of progressed, we've probably seen a little bit of a trend over the last 12 to 18 months that has probably resettled, and that those smaller businesses now have probably been exposed to the current economic climate that we're facing in terms of interest rate rises. So that's kind of been an interesting play, and we're certainly seeing probably a little bit more vacancy now on the high street and strip than we had previously. I think overall, we've had some big falls this year. When we look at the Mosaic Group, for example, unfortunately that business has come to an end, and the remaining stores within the group will close in April, and that's been substantial job losses right across that business, which has been really, I suppose, disappointing. However, saying that on the other foot, you've got some large international businesses and some strong Australian businesses that have been growing and getting bigger, looking to open more stores. We're seeing a little bit of a re-emergence around the Melbourne and Sydney CBD. Mecca will open a 4,000 square metre box in the Melbourne CBD this year. Another international large retailer will have a presence in the CBD, and Lululemon expanded into the Emporium, and it's their #1 store across the network globally in terms of sales. So probably a real mixed bag from a high street strip perspective, right across the different asset classes. But all told, I think it's probably been a good year in general for retailers, albeit it's been difficult.
A good year, yeah. Okay, well, that's interesting. And Mark, what about you? What are your clients seeing in the market over the last 12 months or so?
Yeah, probably very similar to Keith. I mean, we work with big box retailers and specialty retailers. So we've seen some of the guys that did really well in COVID, I guess, keep investing and then keep doing the same thing and continue their store rollout. So in that sense, yep, probably the same as you, Keith. We saw brands having really good years. And then on the flip side, there was definitely brands that really slowed their store rollouts and their store development process. And really started to look at costs and cutting costs. So I think it was certainly last year was a tough year for people. So in the shop fitting world, it was all about trying to get things done at the lowest possible cost for the last year or so. So that's probably where we're at. Hopefully the signs are looking good into this year. So I think forecasts, from most of the brands that we work with are looking a lot stronger into this year. There's a lot more positive sentiment, and some of those stores are already starting to sort of take place. So hopefully looking good.
Cool. What about you, Lloyd? You work for a range of clients across retailers domestically and internationally. What's the sort of trends you saw last year looking back?
Thanks, Bruce. A couple of things to start with. Firstly, the population grew by 500,000 over the year. So if you've got a business with a catchment of 25,000 people, you need 20 new locations just to maintain your presence, right? So there's still growth in population that you need to keep up with. And we're about to launch our fast food report. So it'll say things like 180 new locations in fast food in the top 30 odd brands across Australia. So still strong growth. Biggest performers, interestingly, by proportion, Guzman's and Zambero. So we're moving to Mexicans when it comes to our fast food eating habits. Couple of interesting sectors. Childcare, lots of inquiries, right? So everyone wants to operate, build, or capture a tenant as in the childcare sector, probably fueled by government investment. A couple of interesting drive-through entrants. So Soul Origin, you would have seen an announcement recently, have got into drive-through. We've got a bakery client that's entering the drive-through market, which is interesting, and there's a little bit of growth in cafes and drive-throughs. Not property, but there seems to be growth in home care sort of activities. So people who provide services to the aged or the disabled, a few franchises launching in that space. And then some interesting sectors like co-working. So businesses moving into the suburbs to present co-working space, bubble tea, a bit of growth. And I've had a few inquiries this year about laundromats. So that's a sector that seems to be changing and still growing. On the data front, it's amazing how many people are sort of reaching out for location intelligence. So we're finding real estate agents, brokers, developers in that space, private investors who have a holding in some of the fast food clients. They're looking for location intelligence to see from a macro perspective what their clients are doing. And we're starting to see, a generation of users move around from one client to the other. So the data and access to location intelligence more ubiquitous. And look, just briefly on the international front, a little bit of pressure on US businesses in Muslim countries, in Asia Pac and Middle East, as you'd expect. And fast food are growing their footprint and their access to location intelligence data, particularly in Asia Pac and Middle East. So it's some of the things we're seeing, Bruce.
So that was looking back, I guess, and that's great, Lloyd. Probably looking forward a little bit, Keith. So when you think about what's going to happen this year, so the banks are still talking about interest rates coming down, hopefully sooner rather than later. Which could
any minute.
Yeah. So that would be great. There's an election coming up, so that often that slows activity for a little bit of time from when they call the election for a couple of months and things slow down. We've obviously had the US election, and internationally that's causing some challenges for people, what's going on in the US, and so that sort of flows through into our economy as well. So all those things happening, we've already had a few turbulent couple of years. What are you seeing looking forward now in this sort of environment?
Yeah, look, I think, honestly, I think it's pretty bullish out there. I think probably the key word for both landlords and for retailers is probably innovation. From we're seeing, with some of the brands that we're working with from a retail perspective, innovation is key. We've got a couple of new buzzwords in the market, and phygital is one. So it's kind of that physical store versus the digital component within the store, and what that looks like from a back end perspective. There's more sales being made now in retail stores inline on an app within the store than there has ever been. I think from a landlord's perspective, innovation in their assets is also key. We're seeing a lot of focus around community, for example, albeit there's been very little development over the last 12 to 15 months from a landlord's perspective. And we probably all know why that reason is, but obviously labor costs and materials and so forth have put a lot of developments on hold. But the ones that have probably developed, Westfield Knox is one, for example, I suppose. The focus from the landlord there has been a little bit more around community. So you're seeing landlords looking to increase dwell time, creating community environments, adding in things like libraries and maybe swim schools, for example. So I think looking into the future this year, space will be obviously a premium, and particularly for the good assets. So I think, from a landlord's perspective, they're probably under a little bit of pressure with those larger boxes. And when we break up the different asset classes, there probably are some winners in that, and the large format is probably getting a little bit more inquiry on that side, because basically landlords don't have the space. So with the emergence of probably some international retailers coming into the country this year, Sports Direct, for example, are one that will be coming hard and heavy. We know that already. We introduced Flying Tiger pre-Christmas, which have got 1,000 stores worldwide. I think the flavour will be that it'll be space will be a premium, but certainly the confidence is, I'd say, quite strong, and retailers are certainly bullish to continue growing.
That's great news. And Mark, you've seen the same thing. Are the retailers changing their plans that you're working with and sort of looking at more sites or bigger sites? What's the sort of trends you're seeing?
Yes, I mean, certainly bigger sites are the ones that are successful in expanding and growing their footprints. But I think, as I said before, overall, the forecasts we're seeing out for this year are strong across all the brands we're working with. So we've watched it happen over the last 2 years, where forecasts have been there, but they haven't quite come to fruition for many reasons. One be costs, one be planning issues, finance, all sorts of things. But this year it's starting to roll. So yeah, it does feel pretty good. I mean, there's certainly been lots of brands that have fallen over last year, but I guess that makes way for the new brands coming through, and there's plenty of those. So it does feel like it's heading in the right direction. Hopefully, good news on the interest rate drop today would be very good.
Yeah. What about you, Lloyd? I know your last response, you did look a little bit forward in what you were talking about, but are there other things that you're seeing sort of looking forward in the marketplace?
Well, a couple of comments. Firstly, on the economy and the election cycle, most of our clients will look beyond an election cycle. So we'd like to think that the local election cycle is largely irrelevant from a location intelligence long-term planning perspective. In terms of innovation, a continuation of what's been happening over the last few years, and that's making data more accessible, making it more available, making it easier to use, and making it more affordable. So I think that'll be the trends. To give a couple of examples, we've used mobile device data for a long time, right? We've used it to size a catchment. We've used it to look at foot traffic hotspots, drive times. And recently we've launched a product that helps understand if you put a new location out there, does it impact on any of your existing ones? Is it more convenient for your existing clients to go to the new location? And what does that mean from a cannibalization perspective? Another example just is, again, it's historic, but we've used a data set from CommBank IQ that helps quantify spend across 80 categories. And 3 or 4 years ago, we were using household spend surveys, which were pretty blunt. They only had 12 or 13 broad categories. So you can see a spend that represents very detailed, very granular spend in small catchments that you can use to approximate market share, penetrations, etc. So they're the kind of innovations that we're seeing. And I think they'll continue along those themes of accessibility, affordability, and availability.
Cool. We've got a lot of people on that have joined that have also got lots of experience. So happy to have some comments. You know, Andrew, what's happening at Char Time, or Doug, you've got a number of clients, franchise ready. Your clients, how are they seeing the market? Anyone else, Rebecca? Any comments on how you're seeing the market? Anyone want to jump in or ask a question or make a comment? Don't be shy. Adam, what about you?
Just busy taking notes, mate. Taking it all in so far.
What about you, Andrew? Any comments? I know you've been looking for sight in this sector for a number of years. What are you seeing looking forward?
I think, well, it was interesting. Bubble tea was mentioned as historically one of those attractive. I mean, it's hot at the moment. There's lots of particularly Chinese competitors coming in, so it's interesting for us. I've seen it soften a little bit for some of the other brands, but not necessarily in our space. Definitely getting a lot of heat from landlords, very much around if you don't take it, then there's a line.
Yeah,
as possible. So that's making it tough. And definitely still seeing landlords being really aggressive on their rents going forward on the back of that whole proposition. So, again, if it's not us, so we're losing a couple of sites, or likely to lose a couple of sites on renewals because we just won't. I can't understand how the money will stack up, especially when the landlords say you're the highest turnover per square metre in the category, but you can still afford to pay this rent. And they go, well, it doesn't work at all. So
that's an interesting point, Bruce. Like what landlords are really very good at is having a plan B and a plan C. And what they'll go to the market with, and what they'll tell you all the time is that they want best in class. A landlord always wants best in class in the particular category. They'd like Chart Time, but to Andrew's point, if he's not willing on his renewal potentially to pay the increase, and we've seen some increases come in over the last probably 12 months, anywhere from 66% increase to like 10%, right? And that's a different flavor of retailer. So we are certainly finding that landlords are probably being a little bit head in the sand with that regard. But if you're in a particular category that there is a lot of competition, and the car wash business is a really good example of this. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different operators ready, lined up, willing to potentially take a risk to pay that higher rent. And so, unfortunately, some landlords won't look at the bigger picture from a relationship point of view. That they will just look at the P&L from an income statement and go, okay, where can we get more rent? And you know what? That probably hasn't changed and it's always been there. But certainly with some of the bigger landlords, we're finding that just be a little bit more commonplace.
Yeah, and that's I guess. Sorry,
I say feel Andrew's pain in that regard.
Yeah.
That's pretty much bad. It's not just his business. And
that's mainly shopping centres. We've got a couple of fitness people. So Ben or John from Studio Pilates, anyone's from the fitness industry. How are you finding it, John? And I know Keith helps you out here, but you're on mute. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm off. Yeah, I thought you controlled that. Yeah. Hi everybody. Yeah, from a number of perspectives, we notice things happening. I mean, the landlords typically inflation-proof their rental packages, so every year the rent goes up. But of course, in a competitive marketplace, and we're in one of them, where there's an explosion, a bit like bubble tea, in the Pilates sector, and they probably can't truly differentiate between some of the brands as what the differences are and the benefits. The franchisees themselves have obviously a concern about raising their price per class, which of course is contrary to what's happening with their rent and many other operating costs. So you're facing sort of a flattening of sales figures because just the nerve to be able to increase those prices in a competitive market, knowing that you've got these looming increasing costs coming along. So it does put some pressure on the franchisees. And we have our national conference in a week or two's time, and we'll be doing our best to encourage them not to be so shy about how they present their product in terms of pricing to the market. But and of course, the rising cost of introducing new franchisees into the market, the cost of build-outs has shot up. Cost of importing product has shot up, and so luckily for us, we've expanded into the US market. We've opened 12 studios last year. We've got 18 or 19 on the skids already to open this year in the USA, plus Canada and the UK. So we've got a little bit of a broadening out, but we see most of that pressure probably in the Australian market.
Yeah, cool. Anyone else? We've got some more specific questions, obviously, for the panel, but if there's anyone's got any comments or questions now, sing out or raise your hand. Otherwise, I might loop back around then to you, Lloyd, in terms of location intelligence and obviously what's happening with the technology advances and how that's impacting on the retailers. What are you seeing there?
Again, I come back to the getting better information and better tools in the hands of those that are planning networks. So again, another little example. Most of the players in our sector will have a means of prioritizing gaps in the market, right? So we call it Gap Finder. It's historically been an advisory service, so one that's done off platform, with data scientists and clever tech. We've put a version of it in our platform, so it's hands-on for network planners and available to CEOs and heads of property, etc. So again, I think the advancements will be how do you use the suite of tools that are out there and give more power to those making decisions to do scenarios and do better analysis and have more capable tools in their arsenal.
Sure. And Mark, what about you in terms of innovation in the fit out and the shop from a shop fitting point of view? What sort of things are people coming to you and asking you to do, or what ideas are you coming up with for your clients in terms of how to use the space more effectively?
Yeah, I think the big one's obviously integration of technology. And that's going to include AI. So we're just working through now from an offering, what we can offer as a standard offering. But I think the challenge is always, you can put all this technology in, but does it really add any value to the consumer when they come in, to your site? So I think that's a challenge, and that's why, for the most part, we see people put in a couple of screens and send some information to clients and don't put in all the technology that they could. So I think that it's not dissimilar to AI now. There's AI out there, it does heaps of stuff. Everyone's trying to work out how to use it and how it's going to add value to their daily life. So I think it's the same in retail. Where does the technology add value to the consumer and also maybe to the staff in store? How do they use it? How does it benefit them to help customers? So that's the challenge we're sort of looking to solve this year. And, for each client, it might be very different. Some might need a small amount of technology and it adds a lot of value, and others might need a lot more and can add a lot more value with it. So that's.
And I guess that at the same time, you've got, like as John just mentioned, the rising costs, and it's been a tricky few years for people to try and keep their fit outs under control from a budgetary point of view. Then they're adding all these technology advances and stuff into the sites, and so is it a little bit of like, well, you can have all this tech, but it's going to change some of the other things that you're using?
100%. It's always that sort of balance. So we're always working with customers in terms of saying, all right, where are we spending the money? So yeah, if it's tech, we might need to save somewhere else. So we cut down somewhere else. So there's always got to be, some compromises there to keep budgets in check. There's a lot of new materials coming on the market, which are helpful. So we're always looking at that, things to sort of reduce costs with the same look, same durability, same life cycle. So new materials certainly help.
Cool. And Keith, we talked generally about the sector earlier and sort of, the impact on the economy and other things on, retailers more generally, but kind of diving into a little bit more detail in terms of the different categories. And so you mentioned that there's been a little bit more pressure on the strip shops that, during coming out of COVID, they were sort of the darling and everyone was excited to go to their local coffee shop and stuff. And now they've been told to come back into the office a little bit more. So how's that, more specifically, are there areas where strip shops are sort of still going well, and then flipping it over, how the shopping centres going out in the big shopping centre areas and the big box retailers.
Yeah, I think the look, the street and strip will always have a presence. It's probably I think convenience is a big part of what that looks like, and I think mix is the other key part of it. You know, if someone can use their local village and they can go to the baker and the candlestick maker and they can get good parking and get a good coffee, I think there's always a market for that. I think where it gets a little bit patchy and it gets a little bit erratic, and maybe parking's not so good, and the individual retailers don't have the right environment, well, then people just kind of move on to the next better and brighter retailer. And that's probably a warning for us all. I mean, that's the standards that I think we're facing now going into this, into the next 5 to 10 years, that the customer is a lot more demanding and certainly wants a lot more, irrespective of what they're buying or what they're shopping. Yeah, I think from a landlord's perspective, they're thinking similar to retailers. I mean, they have to be innovative in how they keep customers at their centre for longer. And obviously MAT for a landlord is what matters most. And I think I touched on best in class, but if they can get the biggest and the brightest retailers and create a better environment for the customer, well then, we've got so much competition within the shopping centre world here within Australia that, people can drive 5-10 minutes and pass the centre to go to a different one because they might feel that the mix is better and, it's their favourite coffee shop is there, or they get better parking. If they want to spend time as a family and they want to get a cinema and then they want to get a time zone and a bowling and all that kind of stuff, again, they'll drive past one particular asset to be able to do that. So landlords are very conscious of that. They're also very conscious of probably not taking on the bigger players within their environment, and then they're looking a little bit more community focused. An example of that is I was in an asset last week in Forest Hill Chase that is just being purchased by Haven, and they sit in a tough environment there, so they've got to really be careful on how they mix that centre going forward. It's a slightly older demographic, and they need to really play to that audience. So from a landlord's perspective, still innovation as much as it is for retailers moving forward.
And what about the homemaker centres? Is there still a number of them popping up, and they seem to be high demand whenever a new one comes, and all the majors end up in there?
Yeah, no, for sure. Look, that's a good question, because I think that they've probably been one of the winners in all of this also, because larger space is not really on offer from a landlord perspective, or sorry, should I say it's limited in terms of the larger boxes. Now, we've had some kind of play happen with the department stores over the last kind of 24, 36 months. And most of that's being done now. It's probably settled down, but certainly where Meyer and David Jones are looking to give back space, that's already happened or is in the process of happening. So, reclassifying that space is been something that the landlord's been able to do, and they've been able to do it very willingly. As I said, MAT has increased dramatically for some of them. And if I use an example of that, probably Bayside, Frankston Bayside, for example, that Vicinity owned, the Mora was closed there over 3 levels. We took a large space with TK Maxx on the ground. Uniqlo took the middle floor, and then we had a large gym operator, Revo Fitness, and another client of ours, Bounce, take the remaining 3,000 square feet upstairs. Now, the combined sales of all those businesses will far exceed what the landlord was getting in MAT from a dying a department store called Moore. So that's kind of happening throughout the country, but probably just not at the speed and the size requirement that these larger retailers would like. So the large format guys, where the zoning is in place, have really won out in that respect. And some of the stronger guys like Homeco, for example, they put on a really good product. They get it anchored really well, mostly probably by, let's say, a Coles, and then they dress it up around that. And it's got convenient locations, convenient parking, and it's got that everyday needs shopper that people want to be able to access it quickly and efficiently. So I think large formats probably won out a little bit in that regard. And I think if landlords had a pain, it would be that they couldn't offer some of those retailers that larger space because they don't have the footprint.
Yeah. So the examples of that where Meyer or David Jones have moved out, how have you seen that impact on the centre more generally? Like, has it been, obviously the Frankston one, the Meyer was tired and they hadn't spent any money on it for years, and it wasn't. Yeah. It had been slowly declining for a long time. So when you've come in and put some new retailers, and has that energized?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so their sales have been good, because it's not just the centre's bad. It's just Meyer wasn't going well in that centre. Yeah,
in days gone past, I suppose Meyer was classified as a large anchor. and
Yeah.
it's not seen as an anchor anymore. And you know that asset sits in a good trade area here. But then you've also got Kringle Hub. You can get in the car, you can drive to Southland, or you can even go further and go to Chadston. So all these kind of reflection points for landlords obviously are important to understand. How do they keep the customer within their trade area? And yeah, I think it's something like it's tripled the sales already in terms of what the landlord's done there. You know, TK Maxx have got a 1,750 square meter floor plate. You know, Uniqlo got 1,500, and yeah, you've got some other activities happening on the higher blind level, let's call it. So very, very beneficial for the landlord from an MAT perspective, but also more from a mix perspective, and then being able to offer the customer a better choice of retailer, and that's probably the key thing in it as well.
Well, I'm interested in obviously the shopping centres, the big centres, and even the homemaker centres, the mix of tenants from the big retailers to include people like bounce and activities and things like that, where there's, you know, golf simulated ones like ex-golfer and shopping centres and others, and how that's going. Like that's, you know, things for people to do rather than just go to the movies at the big centres. Yeah,
no, exactly. I think it's mix is a key component always. But I mean, you got to probably to Lloyd's area, you know, you got to understand the market that you sit in, and like any retailer sitting on the call today, you know, competitor activity is always something that is reviewed. So, you know, where there's an opening for a particular competitor, obviously, you know, we analyze that in deep detail. But I think the overall feeling would be that, you know, if a bounce, for example, is serving the community and it's got a particular demographic that it matches, you know, whether it be the 0 to 6 age profile is very high, or potentially they don't have a location close by, you'll find that, you know, the landlord and the retailer have got the same interest in that situation. Because look, whatever we say about landlords, you know, it's important that retailers are profitable and can pay their rent, and landlords go into those deals with their eyes wide open. And sometimes, you know, they're at risk for whatever reason. Maybe to one of the callers' points earlier, rents are probably just ridiculously high. However, you know, you'd like to think in the best case scenario, landlords and retailers are going into it eyes wide open, and that, you know, they feel the market's there for their product to be able to thrive and be profitable, you know.
Cool. Yeah, and Lloyd, going to, so, you know, the use of data-driven insights into design and layouts and all sorts of things. So how are you seeing that play out in the space in retail now?
In design and layouts, well, a couple of things probably come to mind. Understanding your catchment, not just from a walk-in and pickup point of view, but where you've got delivered activity, right? So what does your delivered catchment look like? And what does that mean for your network, your store network? Does it mean that you need every location with the same features, or do you have kind of a hub and spoke arrangement because your invariably delivered catchment looks bigger than a walk-in or a pickup? People don't mind how far Uber or somebody delivers their product, especially in food areas. And, you know, do you need to change design and layout to accommodate some of those changing patterns? It's not long ago that we were talking about things like dark kitchens. You know, so they probably 4 or 5 years ago, they really haven't manifested themselves in any great way, shape, or form. It's, you know, the cost of setting up a kitchen is the bulk of a fast food or restaurant costs. So, you know, it's not that hard to add additional seating and you know, create the drop in and the pickup activity. So, you know, understanding that's probably useful. Understanding customer journeys. So what are customers doing pre and post your visits, and are you best placed to satisfy that? And I think beyond design and layout, just making sure that you understand your, you know, are you providing convenient locations for your customers? You know, do you need a store every 2 kilometers in order to meet your customers' convenience demands? So design and layout and planning for network and the size of your business and its capacity to have how many stores in a market.
Cool. And what about you, Mark? How are you seeing the use of data in, you know, your industry, and like what people are coming to the table with when they're looking at their designs and fit outs?
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably on our side, there's not a huge consideration. They're coming to the table with a lot of pre-knowledge. And so from us, I guess we're taking direction at that stage. So yeah, so probably on our side, it's not a huge driver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you, Keith? Is he seeing more the use of data and sort of decision making in terms of like locate, like find?
Yeah.
this-
Oh yeah, it's probably it's gone crazy actually in that regard. I think, you know, understanding the why is really paramount. And look, we've been partnering with GapMaps for a long time, and it just gives us one side of the reflection point as to maybe why we choose a location, and that is important because it does provide very informative, up-to-date information. But then we need to have the information then on the actual asset itself in terms of the heartbeat of that particular centre, how it's performing, how it's trading, what the vacancy rates are like, what the benchmark rents are, and so forth. So but when you get both combined, I think everybody now is looking for enough information as to why, and you've got to be able to provide that. So I think data now is probably being used in this industry a lot more than probably it ever has been, and which is a good thing, you know. But and it will keep improving, I'm sure, you know, as AI kicks in. We're seeing a little bit of that now kicking in, and I'm not so sure about how that's going to manifest itself just yet in our particular industry. However, I do think, you know, as it improves, let's see where that space goes.
Cool. Thank you. And Julie, sorry, you're on mute there, but you've raised your hand. So whereabouts are you from?
Retail food group.
Cool.
Hey everyone. I was just wondering what the panel is seeing in terms of sustainability, in terms of shopping centres and store designs, because we're working hard to try and get finishes that are sustainable for the future, but their landlords are still requesting a refurb every 5 years or 7 years, or, you know, so it's that balancing out how you sort of manage that in the process. And I just wondered if the panel had any feedback, or any of the other attendees had feedback on that.
You must have saw my questions, Julie. That was my next question. Mark's really ready and loaded for this question.
It's a really interesting topic, this one, in terms of sustainability. I mean, one of the things is, I mean, consumers are driving it, so it has to happen because consumers want it. So you sort of got to get on the train no matter what. But one of the questions is, what is sustainability? And so a lot of people, and a lot of the big brands I've dealt with, globals, over the years, have sort of more talked about, you know, recycled content. So they say, well, great, we've chosen a product, it's got recycled content, so we're making a great decision for sustainability. So let's say, you know, the store contains a lot of chipboard, contains a lot of MDF, which is a pretty predominant sort of material in the fit out world. The life cycle of that product is, you know, 3 to 5 years, let's say, as long as that fit out's going to last. That chipboard, that MDF goes into landfill at the end of that 3 to 5 years. So for me, I don't think all the answers are there for what sustainability really is at the moment. There's no legislation really sort of driving it. It's brands driving it, probably with a little bit of confusion, maybe marketing led more than anything else. So I don't think I think life cycle's got to be considered on a more longer term basis. So I don't know whether, Julie, that answers your question. Maybe ask more if I didn't get to what you were asking there.
Well, I think it sort of meets what we're experiencing at the moment. So everyone wants to do something. Do we know what we're doing and how it fits into everything is probably the bigger question. And I think it sort of seems like maybe everyone's on the same board with that at the moment. We're all learning and evolving, and the lack of clear legislation in to take it forward makes it even more difficult, because you don't want to do something that then is not going to be, like, we're doing lots on packaging and all that sort of stuff, but in the store design and fit out space, we're still working through it, I suppose.
Like the Green Building Council does offer, you know, certification for interior fit outs, so you can do that, but it does come at a cost. That's probably the highest standard you can achieve, but it doesn't provide a lot. I don't think there's any funding given for interior fit out for, you know, many green building standards as opposed to construction. In construction, it's a little bit different because the energy efficiency ratings sort of drive a lot of decisions around sustainability as well. So those ratings keep going up. On the flip side of the ratings going up, obviously the cost of build goes up on the back of cost of build goes up, rent go up. So there's definitely a cost to doing it all. So there's lots of challenges around sustainability. But I think it's great that everyone's doing something, but I do think there's lots of confusion around what is sustainability and what's the right decision around it for sure.
Anyone else, Keith or Lloyd?
Yeah, probably the only comment I'd make there. Hey, Julie, how are you?
Hey, Keith.
Yeah, probably the only comment I'd make to Julie's question was the mention of landlords wanting you to refit, maybe let's say on expiry, and that unfortunately is from day one when you sign your lease that the terms and conditions will be there. So it's probably always mindful to be very careful of that minor detail as to maybe what that looks like, because we do find that after 4 or 5 years, financially a retailer might not necessarily be able to afford to do a refit, or he's got an adjoining tenancy around them, or probably numerous adjoining tenancies that haven't reinvested in their businesses. So it's always one of those tricky conversations with a landlord as to how that plays out. Most really good retailers will make sure the store still presents well and they want to have it looking its best. However, being told by a landlord that you need to do a full refit after 5 years is not always very economical.
I'll just add to that from my previous life was with one of the big banks, so $1 million fit outs and pressure to renovate those every 5 years on lease expiry. So we had a little bit of success in saying they couldn't ask us to renovate do a full refit within until the next term renewed, and some ways of some tools to define a refurbishment as a minimalist one. So, you don't have to replace all the fixtures and fittings, but you may get away with replacing some of them, right? So you may be able to minimize that strategy, but I feel your pain, and maybe you've got some capacity and some leverage. We thought we did in the bank I worked for, but it doesn't always work with a Westfield or some of the other majors.
Yeah, it's an interesting point though, because if we got to be sustainable and have something that's got lifestyle to longevity to a product that will last 10 years and might be your brand standard, and then there's pressures to obviously keep evolving, I suppose. Maybe we can add in some innovation rather than big structural changes that will maybe sort of take it forward.
Julie, have you heard of circular economy?
I have not.
No, it's something that's gaining momentum in the market, but it's about, in part at least, the reuse of products. So it sort of flies in the face of throwing everything out and redoing it, I guess. But particularly materials like steel, aluminium, glass have an endless sort of life cycle. They can just keep being recycled, so they're good products. But circular economy is the use of materials over and over. So we see it like with the hardware chains. We see it in pharmacy. They're using a lot of metal racking. Really durable, so they'll take it from store to store. So if one store closes down, moves, they'll take racking from one store to the next, because it really doesn't change in terms of how it looks and feels. So I think that's something.
Thank you. I'll have a look into it.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
So Mark, I'll just sort of loop back around. So Julie mentioned consumers are driving the sustainability thing, but are there other consumer behaviour trends that you think are impacting on the fit out of the sites?
Sorry, Bruce, can you repeat that, mate?
So we talked about consumer behaviour and the shift in what the consumers are looking for, and so obviously sustainability is one of those things, and that's driving the purpose of the retailer. But what about in terms of the spaces and what how the designs are being impacted by consumer behaviours?
Yeah, definitely. I guess, designs are certainly evolving at the moment. Sustainability is definitely one thing that is driving design and is driving the thinking around design. Certainly the new generation, trying to understand, what the new generation is going to want out of a retail space, how technology plays into that. I think that's something we all need to work out. We're coming out of a different era into a new era now, where the market's hopefully going to become more buoyant, more active, but it's going to be driven, not by the generations it was pre-COVID. So designs have to evolve to suit the new generations, and they want what they want out of those spaces and how they act in those spaces and how they make purchasing decisions. So I think there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into it. It's obviously different for every brand, and every brand has a different sort of demographic target. But you know, the new generation is going to be the big spenders, that's for sure. A lot of generational money coming through. So
yeah. Kevin, I saw your comment there. You're happy to jump on and talk through what you're saying there, but with landlords taking over sites at previous food setups where they left their fit outs behind, so it's helping save the costs.
Yeah, so just to obviously touch base on what Julie was talking about earlier. So we're actually focusing a bit at the moment on landlords in which there may be a food place that has exited for whatever reason, financially, etc., and leaving behind their fit outs. And what we're doing is we're picking up those sites and retrofitting it with, you know, and designing things around what's already in place. So for instance, there's the site in Eastlands here in Victoria where we're taking over an existing shop that has, you know, pretty good commercial kitchen already in place. So with all of the fridges and freezers and even the canopies, etc. So all we're needing to do is obviously just fill in the gaps. And in the end, the franchise partner obviously has a lower investment in a site where we obviously utilize a lot of analytics ourselves to predetermine what the type of sales it will generate. And so obviously driving down that return on investment as well. We're doing another one also in Haymarket, believe it or not, too. Very similar scenario with a very similar competitor that's just exited from that location. And even with the counter, we're looking at probably just utilizing the existing counter and, with the dishwashers and everything else already in place and just changing the aesthetic fit out a little bit and just changing the color coding just to, again, help benefit the franchise partner with a lower investment cost and obviously get the store open very quickly as well.
It's good that, if it is able to save money. It's interesting, Mark, isn't it? Like, I know, are you better off starting from scratch? It's just, or you're going to, is it going to be saving money? It's great. Is that common that have you been asked to do that? No.
It's initially it was a bit more of a luck start with. It
wasn't a strategy.
About 18 months ago.
Yeah.
We did it with Woodgrove, and we essentially built a store literally for 50% of what it would normally cost us. And since then, obviously, our franchise leasing team have just been on the lookout and engaging and keeping conversations happening with the likes of QIC and Westfield as well, just to see if those opportunities do eventuate. And obviously, Centuro, we attach ourselves onto that restaurant market area anyway. So when something pops up, obviously, the landlord's telling us, and we're doing our analysis and determining straight away whether that's viable or not. And then from there, we'll do a pre-costing with our build team to determine what can be saved, what can't be saved, to the extent of even going in and measuring. The landlord's allowing us to measure certain things to see if we can fit other things around what's already there.
Yeah, someone's actually asking you a question there, Kevin, in the chat. So, what analytics are you using or tech to sort of analyze that?
We're using it. So it's three-prong attack, I guess you could say. So obviously we've got Lloyd here from GapMaps, but we utilize spectrum analysis at the moment, just as a base leveling, and then we overlay that with what's happening in our existing stores around the same area as well, and existing demographics as well. Then overlaying that with where the leasing side of things is going to end up based on historic data that we have. And then laying that over the top of an estimated build cost to predetermine what is the likely ROI of this particular site if it was to do sales of this much, sales of this much, sales of this much. And if we can foresee the return on investment based on all of that being within a range, say hypothetically speaking, between 3 or 4 years, and the lease happens to be 7 years, well then more often than not we would say, okay, we can theoretically see this happening. History shows that other stores similar to this can achieve very much certain the same kind of outcome. Let's proceed accordingly.
Cool. And Lloyd, I might go to you. I know talking about your competitors. I'm sure GapMaps.
Where's the mute button?
Who are they? Yeah, we didn't hear that. Sorry, but what about other technologies? Smart technologies that people are using to change their customer experience in retail.
Well, probably not so much a location intelligence question, but so when I think about smart technologies or technologies that help customer experience, the things that spring to mind are things like, you can understand the stock levels at a store that you might go and purchase something from, and if they haven't got one, you don't go there, right? So it's those sort of things, or things that allow you to find details of products from barcodes or locations within stores, check-in systems, those sort of things. So they're that tech on site is and on the web is far more important from a customer experience point of view. We do a bit of location intelligence work for new shopping centres. So we'll do we'll help understand the spend in the primary, secondary, and tertiary catchments, the likely mix that would be optimal given the demographics of an area. So that might help. But generally, the tech that supports customer experience is the user sort of tech more than location intelligence, I would think.
Yeah.
So otherwise, we'll support decisions with, understanding your catchment, who your customers are, and some of their behaviours through things like mobile device movements. And that will inform, and the better informed you are, the better the customer experience will be in your location. And of course, making sure you've got the network in the right places.
Yeah. And Keith, sort of flowing through that, in talking about retail spend and whether it's increased or decreased, and sort of what does that look like, the mix of spend that's online compared to out of the stores and things like that. So how's that been playing out, and how do you see it sort of looking forward, with the retailers wanting to open more stores?
Yeah, okay. Another good question, Bruce. I think if we just look back at that probably November, December period, December sales kind of were probably just a little bit soft, but over the year, I think we sat around 4.6% growth, which I think was the largest annual growth we've had since March 23. So I think that's really encouraging. I think probably to context that a little bit, though, we've seen the importance of what Black Friday does in November sales for most retailers, and now that's kind of moved on from a day of Black Friday to Cyber Monday, and we had a weekend of it, and now this year we've kind of found that retailers are probably extending that whole Black Friday for probably a couple of weeks. So albeit it probably hurts margin a little bit, it certainly draws a lot of traffic that probably takes a little bit away from that, traditional, the strong December sales that most retailers would probably bank on, because it's a difficult business to be in when you're forecasting sales numbers. I think, when Kevin talks about, you look at an existing store and you try and forecast what you feel you'll do, or you've already done, or you've got a benchmark. Ultimately, they're still forecasts. So I think it's interesting to think that, Black Friday will probably continue and get stronger. And if anything, I think it will probably be, and already has, I think, from some of the larger internationals even, and local retailers, they've said that it's been bigger than their traditional Boxing Day sales. So I think that's an interesting part of that. I think confidence-wise, look, I'd say, strong to measured is probably the best way I'd put it. We've got some very good growth plans for a lot of our clients, probably most, if I'm honest. So I think strong and measured is probably the key to that success. Understanding, where you're going to open your next store is absolutely paramount. Making sure then that the right commercial deal, is there, and that all your P&L assumptions and your forecasting, and that all plays out in year one as it does in year 5 at the end of your lease. So, that's probably no different. But I think, having a more micro lens on competitor activity is also important, because, certain categories are being cannibalized. And I think John mentioned it earlier on. John's got to say, well, there's a lot of Pilates operators in the business now, and looking over your shoulder and probably not being ignorant to that, I think, is key as well. Is probably really understanding where the competitors sit in your marketplace is really important, because that does too then reflect on what your forecasting looks like. So I think, albeit going into this year, very, very encouraging. As I said, we've got some new players coming into the market. from an international perspective. But we've got a lot of homegrown Australian businesses, small and medium, that have got some strong growth plans. And I'll be looking forward to those interest rates dropping today and every other month until the end of the year. And we get back to a point where that disposable income that's been gobbled up by those increased rates maybe gets spent in the retail environment over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. keep the stores opening and trading well. So, I might last question. If anyone else has got a question, let me know. I've got one more question for the panel, but if someone wants to jump in with one last comment or question, Kevin, you got something, or you? No, all good. Lloyd, you mentioned earlier with the increase in the population. I think you said 500,000, which was the thing. And obviously, probably thinking about Victoria, but the government's been looking at different areas of for the residential development and what that looks like in multi-level developments in certain areas. And so the trends around and the immigrants and where they're coming from, and coming from countries where they're used to high rises and things like that. And so what sort of the residential development trends and how that's sort of creating opportunities for retailers or challenges for retailers? What are you seeing how are you seeing that play out?
Residential trends probably will continue to see greenfield developments like the Tarneets and the Werribes of the world and to the north of Victoria, Melbourne. And so they'll just provide the usual opportunities there. I think the interesting one will be infill, where you've got high density being encouraged in and around things like the big urban rail loop, and maybe to a lesser extent around the metro in the two in Sydney and Brisbane. And that brings new opportunities. So, higher density, possibly families moving into residential towers and staying there longer term, and it invites an opportunity for a different retail mix in those infill locations. And of course, the challenge will be make sure you understand, if you're doing that, what foot-based traffic looks like as opposed to driving, and your impact on your existing network.
Keith, any comments, or is that you got clients talking to you about what that looks like across the country?
Yeah, look, I think just by and large, I think the influx is a key component of what's driving a lot of probably pressure points. I think we all understand the pressure points on the housing market. Whether we get to a situation where like France, or where we're kind of going up versus out, I'm not so sure. I think the identity of the Australian is that they've had a piece of land and it's the home is where the heart is. So I think ultimately it will have to happen. But I think certainly, to Lloyd's point, it's certainly creating a lot of this higher residential is creating opportunities for that smaller businesses like the cafes and the studio platies of this world, because there's minimal kind of floor plates available, but there are catchment directly within that environment. So I think it'll be interesting to watch this space going forward to see what that looks like. I still think though, that the larger big box development that has all the bells and whistles will ultimately be the prize for the customer, because as I said earlier on, dwell time is something that we're seeing increasing. So it's a day out. Australians like to shop. It's probably why we have so many shopping centres. They want to go, they want to shop, they want to eat, they want to relax, they want to dine. And I think the landlords are very attuned to that now, and they're looking to try and make sure that trade area within their asset where it sits, they offer all of that and more.
Cool. And Mark, any other comments on this one, or we?
No, I think the boys have that well covered. Yep.
Cool. Well, I'm just going to pull up one more slide. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for joining today. And of course, thanks to Mark and to Keith and to Lloyd for all their contributions and preparation and their insights into, looking back and looking forward and what's happening in the retail property market. This was the first of our BDC webinars this year. We have got some other ones coming up. You'll hear from the John and John show. So John Cooksey and John Sully are going to look at, driving performance of franchisees to really increase the numbers of sites you've got, particularly if they're emerging, but even larger. We've got some larger established brands on the call today, and how can we continue to increase the number of sites, and improve performance of your franchisees. So 29th of April, that's our next one. But thank you again for taking some time out to join our Cool. If you didn't get to see it and you're watching this recording, please reach out if you've got any questions as well. So thank you very much. See you later. Have a good day.
Thanks, Bruce.